All right, we're live. I have David here, Teos here, and Shawn here. We're going to talk about what it takes to make a really good adventure, what it takes to make a great adventure. And, there's a lot of nuances there, right? Because there's a great adventure for the players. What experience did they have in the adventure? Great adventure for the DM. Did they have a great experience running it? Was it easy to prep for them? Or was it hard to prep, but it's really rewarding? Still, you don't want to be hard to prep. If you can avoid it. And what does it take to get that? And then what is an adventure? Is it a user manual for the DM? Should it be some level of entertainment there for the DM to read it? Otherwise, it's just, technical and really dry for the DM. And it seems like they're getting better and better at doing this because there's so much cross-pollination of ideas now, right? With all these different game companies and people able to make their own products, and I'm just seeing better and better stuff. And so I just want to have an opening statement from each, see what your thoughts are, how is it getting better? And then we'll kind of dive into your thoughts about user manual versus entertainment value. And then we'll take questions from the chat. So if you guys are watching the chat, you have a question, throw it in there. Got some already that we can bring over from the Discord. So let's start with you, David. You're running a lot of adventures. What makes a great adventure for you to run?
Well, for me, what makes a great adventure easy to run is that it calls out the things that I need to run it in an obvious way. And one of the things that I've seen come out in the last, well, perhaps since I've been running adventures in public, is an attention to the threads and the lures, clues, whatever you want to call them, secrets that draw the party from one point in the adventure to the next. And I think that sort of thing used to get lost a lot. I remember early on when I was running adventures, I'd really have to go through them with a fine tooth comb and try and figure out what was making the adventurers go to this next point, this next scene, whatever it was. And that could be a challenge. I think that a lot of the designers weren't really thinking about it so much for other DMs because perhaps they were so used to improvising that sort of thing at the table. So it was just the water that they were swimming in, and they didn't pay any attention to it. But it didn't come across in the adventures. And I think with Matt Colville talking here about motivations, with Mike Shea talking about secrets and clues, with the Alexandrian talking about the node design of adventures, we're really seeing that sort of thing come out, and I'm happy to see it.
Yeah. Teos, you're working on the Crack the Sun adventure. So your boss gave you this goal here is how do we make the players understand what's going on in a way that's not just leading them by the nose? So what are your thoughts on great adventures?
Yeah, those are neat thoughts. It is true. There's an art there between what's seen and unseen that we can talk about in detail. For me, looking at evolution, I think we really evolved a lot in a certain period of time. But I feel like recently we're just sort of fine tuning. We're not making giant leaps. And I wonder whether a giant leap is coming and we just need some really solid examples to help us. In that, I think adventures are still largely sort of being written to expect everybody to run them from start to finish in a particular way. There are a few games and companies that provide a lot more breathing room, but then that's an entirely different style. And you're in either an A or B mode. And I think there's something there that we haven't quite figured out on how to make a completely different model. We did not attempt to do that with Crack the Sun and wildly change everything. We stuck to what we know works well and trying to provide the right amount of information for somebody to run it from start to finish. But I think there's a lot of work to be done over the years to come. That'll make it exciting, makes it worthwhile and fun to be a part of this.
Yeah. Shawn, you've written a lot of adventures that are set for 1 hour duration, some of them. Mm-hmm. And you convey a lot of information to the DM in a hurry there. So what are your thoughts? What's your evolution been through the years?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm continuing to learn is how the goal of the adventure needs to dictate what the format is. And so the first adventures that the old school guard played were those modules from TSR back in the day, and they were all done in a in a very particular way.
Yeah.
As you could see, big wall of text.
Yeah.
Some things were bolded, but the formatting left a lot to be desired. And I used to say, adventures need to be a user manual for the game master. You're not writing for the players, you're writing for the game master. And the game master is going to present their story, their roadmap through the adventure to the players.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's still applicable to shorter adventures. That can be a user manual. For a longer adventure, you really are creating more of a toolbox than a user manual. Because you need to rely more and more. The longer the play session, the longer the campaign. If you're making a distinction between adventure and campaign, the longer the time span that your text has to cover, the more you need to rely on that game master to be able to take it and do things with it. So in that case, you're creating more of a toolbox than a user manual.
Yeah. I ran this adventure recently. And of course, these first edition adventures, they suffered from no word processors. They were just stream of consciousness right down on the page. Everything I can think about this room, not in any particular order. Secrets mixed in with things that should be obvious, and I can really catch you off as a player. So I did a revision just to that room, and you can just with some simple formatting quickly, change it to what the players can see. And I like how Dropseal does their bullet points. They're not really going to read aloud text. It's like, okay, here's obvious things, and let the DM embellish. It's not a lot of detail there, but it gives the DM the idea of what's there in the room. And I think Greg Marks had a great recent post about this, and you should go read that post. I'll put the description or the link in the description below. It's a really good post, and it has to do a lot with get out of the way of the DM. Now, this is for, of course, probably more organized play situations. But at the same time, I think even any adventure should be this way to some extent, right? It's like give the DM the tools to know what to start with, and then kind of get out of their way. Because he talked about how painful it is to remove things, which I thought was interesting. So if I have a wall of text and there's like 5 different things about this NPC, okay, I'm just going to consciously cross 5 of those out or 4 of those out because I don't have time for that, in an organized place. So that was an interesting take on that. And you've written some for the new Legends Greyhawk, where they say that we're going to 8,000 words now instead of 20,000 words. What's that been like, changing like that?
It's been great. Yeah, it's been something that I would naturally do anyway, and I was not like that when I first started editing, designing adventures for Living Greyhawk back in the day, right? I was still going by the old standard of the TSR modules. So it has been a process that we've been learning from. And as someone just mentioned, word processing has now allowed us to do the formatting on our own to make it easier for a game master to parse out the things that they need. And I was talking today in the class I teach about user manuals, and I said role-playing games are user manuals and the books are going to be set up like user manuals. And then I stopped and I looked at the class, who are all in their late teens, early 20s, and I thought, how many of you have actually used a user manual in your life? And like 2 of the 20 raised their hand. I'm like, okay, and how many just go to YouTube and type in show me how to blank and then just watch someone do it? And everyone raised their hand. And so that's the point where we're at right now. Is, are we still being served as DMs, as designers, by the written word on a page and formatted, or is the next step in the evolution something else? It's hard to do, but it sort of makes sense within the zeitgeist.
So Teos, you're running right now the Delian Tomb, right? Which think maybe has a slightly different format than you might be using in Crack the Sun. Ben Milton just did a review video of it, and he was very direct in his words for how a lot of the content was dispersed among different books. And what's Crack the Sun learning from the early Draw Steel adventures, which I think are good in a lot of ways, with their bullet tags and get into the details and such. But good. You're muted, by the way. Yes.
Thanks. Fourth edition tried this before we did. You know, with the idea of what if you break out the encounter and provide that information separately. And there are some really good things about that format. There were people who really loved that format. I did not particularly love that format. I found it duplicative. Also because I don't run things digitally, I usually have things in paper, and having 4 stacks, right? Because you got to have your 2 pages side by side, or you start losing what's in what order in the stack. So you need 2. Now you need 4 pieces of paper worth of space, and it's just too hard to control that on top of everything else you're doing. So that alone loses me. But I think what did it for me looking at Delian Tomb was that you're just never sure. Do I find that they get a victory, you know, which is like experience and draw steel, in this book or in the other book? Is the treasure in this book or in the other book? And all of that was hard. And so I didn't really love the prospect of trying to do that and trying to explain to our writers how to separate that out. But what I simply did was say to the team, hey, what is the page count under each model? Because we have to pay to print this huge, enormous 5-act adventure. And they ran quick numbers and were like, yeah, let's do it combined. And I'm like, yep, my work here is done. You know, win, because it's a lot easier. And I think one of the things that we have learned, you know, you showed that wall of text in the AD&D against the Giants version. We've learned that you need to break things up. You can have a fair amount of complexity if you organize it well. Like if a complex thing is a development that happens later and you clearly mark that and you let people know ahead of time that, hey, in round 3, you know, a band of goblins is going to run in to help King Snore. That's not really that bad. That's very manageable because you broke it in. It's not okay if it's all in one paragraph. And so a lot of it is that formatting of how you separate that out and understanding, like Shawn said, you know, you're writing for that director, that DM, that GM. And so it's got to be tangible, you know, that you look at it and you really follow. A great way to do it is you start that encounter by saying, in this encounter, these kinds of things are going to happen, right? Just 2 sentences that, all right, good. Now I know what's happening. And then there's box text or bullets or whatever it is that's going to help you do the read aloud. And that's easy. That gives you that grounding, you know, and you can watch an unprepared DM and you can see that, right? They just latch onto that box text. Thank goodness, my safety towel, I can read that out loud. And then they start doing things. And as long as everything's, you know, pretty straightforward in how it's organized, now you can improvise that.
Yeah. Let's go to some quick guest or chat questions, and then I'll go to David, who you just ran an adventure for us, David. So Andrew says, how do you design and present a TTRPG adventure knowing that different GMs interpret and run material in very different ways, and who ultimately decides the right format for the presentation? I'll take a first crack at this. So, of course, I run a lot of stuff, organized play, or a lot of stuff for any game system. And boy, it really helps when there's a good summary at the start that gives you the connective tissue. And then the important connective tissue is really highlighted in the adventure, again, even though it was also at the start. Because oftentimes, I had one example where I was running an adventure and the party's nearly done with one level of the dungeon, and I can't figure out how they're supposed to get to the second level. And I don't see a staircase anywhere, and they're lost. And I'm like, what did I miss? Did I miss describing something? And sure enough, I did. There's one little thing I missed describing. But, you know, and then I went to the adventure author. I said, hey, we got to beef up, you know, some description here of how you get between the different levels. So that can be real important in my opinion. And you talked about it, Shawn, about how you're trying to convey something that's obvious to the player, obvious to the character, to the player. And you can just mess it up with your delivery. You can mess it up with how it's written. And so I think that's where playtesting comes in to some extent. And even playtesting as the DM comes in. If I'm running an adventure for the second time, third time, fourth time, it just gets easier and easier and easier. So, David, you're doing some playtesting. or you've done a couple of adventures on DM Skill, playtesting a third adventure. What have you experienced doing those playtests? You don't do just with us. You do with other people, DMs who haven't seen the adventure before. How does that go?
Well, one of the things that, I try and bring out in the playtesting is my adventures tend to have sort of a plot that runs through, but I want a lot of ways for the characters to choose their own adventure that happens during them. So there's a lot of concerns that I have with the information flow and how the players have those aha moments where they figure out, what am I supposed to do next? So with that last adventure, I had 3 different ways into this dungeon complex, and you had to figure out some things about what you're supposed to do as you go through it. And I was really concerned that some of these revelations would not come through if you went one way versus another way. So that's something I'm working on and still with play testing that adventure, because you immediately threw me a curveball and going in a direction that I didn't necessarily expect. And, I had a certain plan for how things would be learned throughout that, and didn't go quite how I planned. I'm going to have to re-engineer it. Me running it at the table or at the screen, I could kind of swap the furniture as you were going and get things down. But that's not something that a DM necessarily is going to do when they get the adventure in print. So very interesting with the information flow.
The worst feeling in the world as a DM is to miss something that should have been obvious to the players, obvious to the PCs in the world, and then have to ham fist the delivery of more information to them in a way that you try to make it seem like you didn't mess up. And that, because if they should have learned it, they should have learned it. Yeah.
We looked at that with Crack the Sun when we were plotting things out, looking at the master level across all 5 acts, thinking about, okay, which mysteries need to be solved when. And there are just times you need to stop and make sure the players will know everything and that their characters will know everything. And so there's a checkpoint where that has to happen, just to make sure that we're not somehow bringing across to more mystery than we meant to, right? You're supposed to have figured it out by now. Let's make absolutely sure of that.
Yeah.
Is there a way you present that in the adventure, or have you arrived at a way that you present that in the adventure?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see when the author hands it in, but the idea is that there is an NPC that will make sure you get it, right? And
you get
so
to the Council of Elrond.
That kind of thing, yeah. And so there will be they are a spy, but they are there to make sure you understand everything. And so there are some bullets to be ticked off to make sure that you get these things, because it is really important. You can't go forward without that.
Yeah. In the act that I'm writing for Draw Steel, not any spoilers here, but the very first thing I need to do in my act is make sure that these 4 salient points either get completely reinforced or mentioned, at least so the players begin moving in the right direction. And you don't want to just have, if there's that many things that you need to say, you don't want the same NPC saying them all. So you're going to you're going to go to that well, and you're going to say, well, there's an NPC that knows certain things. There's documentation that tells certain things. There is a mural on the wall that shows, right? You can do it a lot of different ways, but you want to make sure it's not boring for the players, but you also want to make sure that it gets done. And sometimes the only way to get it done is to say to the game master, the NPC says these things, read them word for word, because it's important that they understand this.
Yeah,
in that same way that you talked about getting lost as to where to go next. I remember the first time I saw an adventure that said, sort of, I forget what the heading was, but it had a heading that said, next steps. And it was like, from here they will go, it was room 8. From here they will go to room 9. I'm like, well, yeah, duh. But then later it kind of made sense, right? Because you could have gotten confused, and you can go to room 10 or 11 from room 9. And that can be really important, right? And at the end of this, they will have taken this, they'll take the stairs going down, right? Okay, well, that actually, when you need it, it's really valuable. And so it's good to have that sort of where are we going next, or even where we came from. And, you know, the party will have reached this by going through the lava chamber. Okay, you know, good to know. They needed the
Andrew,
key found in the lava chamber, right? It's great.
yeah. Andrew's got a good point. Some people disagree with Ben, and some people disagree with me and others, and like to have the content separate for the adventure. I think it's largely digital versus physical. Physical is not too bad. If you have 2 books there, in 4th edition, we were all physical, mostly. So 2 books worked fine. You could have them both open on the table to the side. But digital, Ben was talking about running it on a laptop, and you had to have 4 different documents open on a laptop, and none of them would fit on the screen, so you had to always be cycling between documents. So I think it is largely a preference, probably, in that regard, digital versus physical. Andrew, welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. So let's talk about some like recent innovations. This has been going on for a long time, but I want to share. This is a pretty neat adventure. So it's the Tales of Bargosa, but it has a nice overview at the start. It's got rumors at the start. I like this because this is something I do with adventures that I'd love for adventures to do more often, is to pull forward the knowledge that you could know about the adventure. I like to do that. I like to pull the knowledge forward to the start, find the characters that have the lore that is applicable for that knowledge, and feed it to them ahead of time, so that when they run into it in the adventure, they can, in character, say, I know what this is. This is XYZ, and this is where it grows, and so this is that kind of magic. And it appears like that's their character. Their character just knew that stuff. It's not, can I make a knowledge check? You know? Yeah. So that's the idea, to bring that forward, rumors forward, overview forward. And this is a one-shot adventure, so it doesn't have a whole lot of extra information. And I like, this is Necrotic Gnome, I believe. Or, yeah, Necrotic Gnome. So they got the overview, the dungeon. I love it when dungeons have factions. You know their relationships to each other. And again, this is a one-shot dungeon. Got rumors, treasure laid out so you don't miss any treasure. And then I like this format that they have here, where it's like, okay, you have a pretty quick description, which you can expound upon if you want, as seems appropriate. And then for everything the players might do, there's a description. So if they look in the pool, if they examine the stairway, they'll see this stuff. If they descend the stairway, they'll see this stuff. If they go down the north tunnel, they'll see this. East tunnel, they'll see that. Pretty cool format there. I really like that. And on facing pages, the maps are always on every page, so you can always see the maps. And one last one, the Dragon Delves, the latest, anthology book from Wizards of the Coast, started doing key plot points, preparation steps, what are the key NPCs, so kind of the same kind of thing. So back to adventures you guys are working on. David, what do your adventures look like in that regard? Are you trying to adopt any of those ideas?
I'm very fond of that thing you showed where there's a sort of a first impressions block at the beginning of a location. Yeah. And then attention to the information flow that cascades from there. Here's the things that they see right at the first impression. And then beyond that, it's calling out the things that they can interact with, look at. I see that as an important skill for DMs just in presenting adventures. So you don't give too much at once and you force the players, force is maybe too strong a word, you encourage the players to dig down from there and look at some of the other features and keep the back and forth going without dumping too much on their lap. So this manages things for the DM, and it also encourages a good interaction back and forth in the play.
Yeah, I really like that idea. Keep the block text to like 2, 3, 4 sentences max, right? Get them acting as opposed to drifting off and looking at their phones. And when you finish your monologue of 2 minutes long and they don't know what you even said, then they're like, well, I'll investigate or something. Yeah.
That whole idea of that Andrew talked about, different GMs and how they comprehend things and what they prefer. I don't love the OSR style of bold keywords and then descriptions. There's something about when I read it, it fragments my brain. And so I read Darkstone blocks and I don't know what to do with it. And I pockmarked walls. It's like I have to re-piece it, stitch it together. It doesn't come across coherently to me. And this is not a knock on Necrotic Gnome. It's in any kind of this OSR type style where it breaks it up and bolds things. Somehow my brain fights with it, right? And so I don't love, I actually like box text even if I don't use it, because it tells me what the flow through is, and I can somehow, my brain can see that, and I can easily improvise and ad lib off of box text, but I can't off of this. I don't know why. I may be uncommon in that way, but it's, you know, it's just tough how no format is perfect for all of us.
Right, exactly. And I don't use that format when I self-format my own stuff. I mean, I like it to be, what am I going to say? In total, not maybe I'll say some more stuff or not. And I might not say everything that's on this list, but at least I know what is there and how I describe it in full. And then I do like to have a few, sometimes this one doesn't have it, but if the party does X, this happens. If the party does Y, this happens. This kind of some bullets at the end.
I know
something. What's your favorite?
When I see the previous example with the block with the whole text, it made me think of Fate. Right. It's like these are the aspects of the room. And so my mind immediately went there. Is this a Fate adventure? But like Teos said, Darkstone blocks, that doesn't tell me at first glance what that means. I now have to read forward to say, oh, the walls are made of dark stone blocks. By just adding those 3 or 4 words, now I understand. So even more important than how it is, it's how the repetition allows your brain to absorb it. So I could do this if I spent the next 2 years using adventures that are all like this.
Yeah,
sure.
Then I would be able to do it. But I'm not going to. So
I often will kind of reorganize a little bit the order that I describe stuff in. Do you guys have a particular order? Like, for example, if there's some key thing that you think the PC should, that's the most obvious thing to the PC when they walk in that room. Do you put it first? Do you put it last? What do you think of that?
I tend to try to put the most important things last.
Yeah.
So when I'm a player and I go into a room, assuming there's no map in front of me, I want to know the size of the room, assuming that it's a room. I want to know the features that I can close my eyes and envision, even if they're not important. And then toward the end, I want the things that I'm going to be interacting with as a player. Yeah. And I don't always do that as the writer, but it sort of makes more sense. It builds up to something. It builds up. It makes a crescendo to then you say to the players, the infamous, what do you do? They're going to remember the last thing best, and they're going to interact with that thing probably more than anything else.
Yeah, and you want to start with grounding the room so that there aren't dangling questions from the intro. Like when I look at this Doors of the Masters, I don't know what this room is. I assume it's just caverns full of like wet debris. But if this room is something like a storeroom, we would want to say that up front, right? Like remove the ambiguity of where you are. Like you want to just, what's the quick take you would have, right? It's a torch-lined pillar or a torch-lined hallway, right? Great. Now I know where I'm in, and it has 3 features: this, and this. Where probably the most, if there's a key one they must latch onto, well then that needs to end in that, right? You know, and staring at from the far end, you can make out a large statue of a dragon with its mouth open as if to breathe. That's important. So we want to do that. But there were also those other 2 things that I might have mentioned before that. So pillar lined, or a torch lined hallway, 2 other things, and that really important one. Now what do you do? And that gives you a good amount of option, and it seems fun for everybody.
If there's a monster and you don't put it last, what happens is they forget everything after the monster, right? A dragon rushes towards you, and the stalactites overhead are, and the pool at the center of the dragon. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why you need to build up toward it.
Yeah. And like you're saying, I like to put the most obvious thing the players might do I'm gonna do this at the end, or the path out at the end, or what action they're going to take at the end. So here's an example of a draw seal adventure. Just four quick descriptions. Tunnels newly created. Blue light reflects from the water across the cave route for glowworms, and then on the far wall is a crumbling stone archway. Yeah. So they can go say, I want to check out the water. I'm going to check out the glowworms. Yeah. And then hopefully they've keyed in that, there's the exit over there. They can go check that out.
Yeah. So that's a good example of the text having cadence to it, so that when you say it, you'll naturally break it up and people will think I can do X, Y, or Z, which is nice.
I do this with all the adventures I put into Roll20. I'll break it up. I'll try and keep it short, so it's no longer than 4 lines of text per paragraph, so that it's just highlights. It's like, okay, we're in a tunnel. It's new. It's overgrown with roots and vines. There's a stream, there's glowworms, and there's this archway. And
for experienced players, I think one of the reasons they tune out box text is because they know that they're going to need to ask questions anyway.
Yeah.
And so even if they paid close attention to every single thing in that box text, they're still going to say, now, wait a second, what was that? And where is that? And what's hanging down from the ceiling? Could you describe that more? So there's this expectation that there's going to be this back and forth anyway. So why bother with listening too closely to this text, which is another reason to put it in for the game master, but to keep it short so that it can get past it and you can get past it and go for the adventure.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the toughest projects I ever had was with Dwarven Forge, especially the first time with what's called Dungeon of Doom, which is a free adventure. And what happened was, they had created these beautiful set piece rooms, and it was my job to create a narrative out of them and encounters in each of them. But when you look at these rooms, they have like 500 amazing things in each and every one of them, right? And at least 10 really great features, because they're selling you this awesome looking terrain, right? And so you don't want to ignore it, right? You want to do something with what's there. And so it was a really tough job. It was almost like if it was a job interview, right? Like, okay, take this and make an encounter of it that doesn't overwhelm the reader. And boy, the first few were so hard. And then I started figuring out methods to break things up into chunks, right? Like the room has these things you're going to notice right now. And the rest of the things have to be triggered as you move further into the room, right? One room I even split into 2 parts and just pretended, they can't quite make out the far end. Once they get there, then you read the second part, because it was just too overwhelming, right? And it was quite fun exercise, and I got a lot better at box text, I hope, since this, because it was so hard to break down these super detailed, really cool rooms. And
yeah, I can see on the map.
Yeah,
that would have been fun.
So room 13 I broke into 2 pieces because it was just impossible to do all at once.
They went for high quality on this one, didn't they?
Yeah, they were originally going to make it into a book, and unfortunately didn't, which I think they have one printed copy, in their offices, but it was a lot of fun.
So David, you've done 3 adventures now. What have you learned from your first one to your third one?
What have I learned? I still am trying to get a tighter text, and I guess what I've learned most is to avoid overcomplication. One of as I'm creating these adventures, I have a tendency to come up with a lot of things that I think maybe are a bit more complicated than they need to be. For example, in Curse of Vecna, the adventure I did, the second, part of the adventure goes from the Shadowfell, the Upside Down, whatever you want to call it, back and forth, and it's in the same layout with the same rooms, but sometimes they're in the Shadowfell and sometimes they're in the prime material. And it really started to prove unwieldy to explain that to other DMs running this adventure. And I think that perhaps if I did it again, I just tear my heart out and cut that complicating detail. And I see aspects of my first adventure that probably were a little bit more complicated than they needed to be, because at the table, not all that complexity is going to liven things up. So there's a certain murder your darlings thing going on
Yeah,
here.
yeah. It's easier when you're running someone else's adventure. I cross out stuff when I'm prepping an adventure. It was really bad in the season 8 where they made it you describe everything twice in those adventures. You had to give the light twice, and you had to give. It was bad. It was like,
Yeah.
oh man.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems with a very strict format is a very strict format will work perfectly in situation A, and in situation B, it will be just the opposite of what you actually need. But you feel the need to fill in the rumors and the
Playing
research,
pillars.
even though there are no rumors or no research going on in this adventure. So being able to be flexible with your format while still keeping all of the most important things to show that the format to help lead the game master through by using the format is important.
Yeah.
I think that ties back to what Teos was saying about designing adventures or writing adventures to suit their purpose. I look at, Shadow Dark adventures, and they're super terse. They're just one step past the Palace of the Vampire Queen in details. But I don't know. You can only do a certain sort of adventure with emergent play and that kind of thing with that Shadow Dark format. And then, at the other end, you've got the wall of text, which I think maybe the purpose was to help designers produce 32 pages of content every month. But I like the idea of trying to find the right tool for the right job and adjusting even in the middle of an adventure to suit what you're looking for. Any thoughts on that?
You had a really good point
about play, right? Organized play has seen that problem of trying to nail a format that will create better play, and I think that's the wrong way to go about it. What you should say instead is, we want adventures that create these kinds of experiences. You, the author, must figure that out. And we are going to read this and tell you if you didn't do that, right? And we'll talk about that, because this, saying playing the pillars, for example, as they did for a while, didn't ensure that there was a lot of role-playing in adventures. It just forced the author to write this extra section that probably no DM was going to use, right? Those are two different, they aren't the same thing, right? You have to say, I want to create an adventure that is really has a lot of choice or has a lot of freedom to it. Well, then that's what you have to do.
So we've talked a lot about the format of adventure, but of course, to me, a great adventure, it's got to be memorable for the players. They had to have a really interesting experience. They weren't just going to kill the bandit down the road, usually. And of course, Crack the Sun's got a pretty amazing adventure. So how's that been? I guess we'll see when it comes out, but how's that been to work on?
Really cool and really wild, because the MCDM team is highly creative, and they all come from video games. They live in LA. They're steeped in Hollywood type approaches, and so when they want big and bold, they're thinking really big and really bold, and they have a lot of influences and ideas. And the hardest part was they had so many cool ideas that getting to that next stage where it really feels like a story you can tell. Right. And that was, I think, where I felt like my job began, was sort of working with everybody to say, okay, but this has to come out into an outline that feels easy, if that's the right word. Like, it's still bold, it's still exciting, it's still awesome. The same way that you could tell somebody, your favorite movie, you can tell them that, right? Because it has a flow to it that feels even natural by the time you've witnessed it. And so we tried to do that to get to where these outlines felt a little better. And our process is to start with the MCDM lean-ish outline, varies by who you ask. Give it to the author and say, okay, here's what we're thinking. We want you to flesh this out and make it your outline. And because the story and the concept and the world, all of this, the experience, it's so important to MCDM. It's important to Matt Colville. Matt has to read that. Other people at MCDM have to read that and say, yeah, okay, what this author is going to do, we really approve this, right? And it doesn't go forward until that happens, which can be a bit painful. You know, one group of authors, by no fault of their own, I think they just ended up doing a thing that was actually really close to the underpinnings of the world. And so we had to iterate a lot before we ended up where everybody was happy. But the hope is, at the end of it, you get a far better story, and the world building is cohesive, you know, in a way that will pay off in the future.
Got a question in the Discord for you, Shawn. It is, what's the difference between your approach and priorities when you're doing your own work versus when you're commissioned for Wizards or other third-party publishers? If you could do it your way, would you do different things? What do you see Ghostfire doing? What do you see Wizards doing? Probably all a little bit different.
Yeah, they're all a little bit different. They all have a little bit different audience. They all have a little bit different goals. At this point, I don't even know if I have a Shawn way of doing it, because everything I do, I'm basically doing for someone. And there are times when I look at, like we said, the format, and I'm like, this just isn't going to work. I'm going to leave out certain sections. I'm going to add a section here. And if the developer, the editor, whoever comes back and says we need to change it, then I will say, this is the reason I changed it.
Yeah.
You're the boss.
You're the boss.
I've been doing this for 30 years. I have some knowledge of how DMs work and how players work. But if there's some reason I don't know that you want to do it a different way, I'll do it that way. Because as a lead on certain projects, I have been in the position before of having to tell a writer, I know you think this is the right way, and in certain situations, this would be the right way, but for various reasons, which I can either tell you about in an hour, or you can just trust me that we're not going to do it that way. So I've been on all sides of it. So I try to always put myself in the shoes of the game master. What is the game master going to need to create the experience we hope that they can create? So I've said this before, when I design an adventure, first I'm designing a Shawn. I'm a great writer. Here we go. Whee! Then I sit down and I'm like, okay, now I'm the game master and I am going to be running this. Now Shawn's an idiot. And here we go. And I go through, oh, Shawn, no. Game masters need this. No, the game master would never want to say that. Boom, boom, boom. Make the second pass. Then the third pass is, I'm a player. I'm going to be playing this. Okay, what is the game master reading me? This box text? Oh, no, way too long. Delete. Oh, no, as the player, I want to know what color the gems in the eyes of the statue are. So I'm going to add just one word, blue, or azure, or whatever fancy word I want, right? So then I go through the adventure as a player. And what I finally figured out is I'm play testing the adventure as I'm writing it. But still, I am only one person. So I need people much smarter, more perceptive, and just with a different way of looking at the world than I do to play test this with me, so I can see how the three Shawns that have written it so far have failed.
And every group's different too. You know, you can have different DMs, but also different groups. They come at adventures really a lot differently. Were you one of the leads for Oracle of War?
Yes. Will Doyle was the actual lead. Okay. But I wrangled authors, helped with design, helped with editing. You know, did
you write the adventure where there's like the fight during free fall?
Yes.
That was awesome. Thank you. So that's like a great adventure. The players like, remember that time we were falling through the air, we're fighting the elementals, and the ship parts were flying past us and stuff. So what are some examples of just like great adventures you've had? I'll start with you, David, then go down.
Wow.
Great experiences or great adventures you ran?
Well, you know, the last great experience I had was running Escape from help me out.
Illusia?
No, the last one you ran for Draw Steel.
Okay. Oh yeah. Draw Steel adventures have been really knocking
from
out the park.
Black Bottom.
Yeah, Black Bottom.
From Black Bottom. Yeah.
fall of Black Bottom. Yeah.
Fall of Black Bottom. Whew. Yeah, that was we got there. That was a great experience. I thought that the encounters were very memorable, set piece type things. Every time we turned a corner, there was some huge setup that Tom had in the system with just epic scope. Everything felt like a climactic ending encounter. Things dynamically changing. I know that's part of the cinematic approach for Draw Steel, but on the other hand, whereas you can end up with what I've heard called my precious encounter syndrome, where the whole adventure is contrived to bring you from one encounter to the next, because so much effort has been lavished on each of these encounters. We didn't feel that way. We felt like we could opt out, and we did. We learned to opt out of some of these encounters along the way. So it felt like we had a lot of autonomy. And since in our first outing, we lost 3 of our characters out of 5, thanks to Tom's relentless foes. We also felt like there was room to fail. So we had to make the right choices because there were no guardrails on this. And if we didn't plan and run a shrewd play, then we could get the rest of our characters killed. And we didn't want that. So that was a great experience for me.
What a great adventure. I mean, the set piece start, multi-level building where you're trying to get people saved, and then from there you're trying to gather information and avoid patrols, and everything's on a clock, everything's ticking down on you, and there's time pressure. It's just really great. Delian Tomb's got a tick down clock, the time pressure on the party, just great event. And the adventure I'm running right now, Dark Heart of the Wood, has an amazing set piece final encounter, which I'm looking forward to running next weekend. So yeah, great stuff so far. And I think adventures make a system for me often more than the system makes a system. You know?
Yeah.
Teos, what have been some of your highlights?
So in Delian Tomb, one that I recently had, or in that adventure that I really liked, was the Wizard Tower, where it has that bottom level, and it's got a bunch of spiders that are part of a puzzle. And what's really amazing about it is that you're fighting these things, and a lot of times when there's a thing to solving it, at some point you've fought long enough, it isn't helpful to solve it. And what happens is half the party's still trying to solve it, half the party's still trying to fight, and you're just wasting time. You should really pick one path or the other. And the nature of this puzzle is very clever, because when you figure it out, it's still helpful. It is no less helpful to figure it out in round 1 than round 2. Like, it's still a boon, because if you do the math of, monster hit points, whatever, it all works. And I'm like, this is so good. And so I'm telling Shawn about it. I'm like, this was so brilliant, da-da-da-da. And he goes, I think I wrote that.
I'm sure the editor had a lot to do with it.
But it was really, it was that kind of sharp design that understands that a puzzle as a solution will wear itself out unless it always provides a strong benefit. And Shawn knew that, right? And he'd be out of experience. And that's that kind of knowledge, right, is so hard to find, that people really get. You have to have played through so many of these to understand that, right?
Yeah. That one was so hard to watch it unfold, and watch the party I was running just keep fighting and not turning it off. I'm like, oh man, you're gonna go through so many resources, but you got
they did edit it to add a clue. There is a clue there that it does. You are supposed to say to the players, like, you realize the following.
Yeah. We put a puzzle encounter into one of the D&D Opens, and it was the first party that gets to point X goes off and plays at the special table. And it just so happened that Chris Perkins was there and ran the special table. And I think I could spoil a 10-year-old D&D Open, but the whole point was if you spend one round not fighting, you win.
Yeah.
But we knew that the first table to play would be the table that's absolutely pounded through everything, and so they are going to be super optimized, and they're only going to think about fighting. So they go off to the table, and the first combat is you fight something super low CR. Okay, it's dead in a round, but then it reassembles itself as something more powerful. And then you go through that and it keeps going. And by the end, this CR, like I think the table was level 7 or level 8 fighting Solars. Right. And at some point, Chris wanders over, and this is like an hour into them going to this special table. And Chris goes, they just keep fighting. And I keep saying the clues that are supposed to trigger them to realize that they don't need to fight. And I'm like, do they listen? And they're like, they just don't even listen to me. And I'm like, just keep going. And so the table got to play with Chris, and they got to go through this really wacky encounter, but they took themselves out of running to win the Open. Yeah. Because they spent their entire time over there fight. But it shows that another table would have figured that out on round 1, gotten all the benefits, gotten the extra points for doing the special table, and gone back. So if you could just put one cool thing in every encounter, you can really please a lot of players. And as the game master, you can put in your own one cool thing. I've seen adventures where there's really no cool thing here in this encounter, but one of the monsters charges and knocks you prone. So I'm going to do that every time I can, not because it's more powerful, but because it's going to be remembered better. And I'm going to describe this goat hitting you and you flying through the air and tell me what your scream sounds like as you fly. And then, the goat turns and looks at you who are 10 feet away, right? And that's nothing to do with the encounter that as written. It's just a bunch of goats that can happen to knock people prone, but you can add that yourself as the game master.
Yeah, always be looking for things to add. When probably all of us were young and we're running for our friends, we're 15 years old and we're running every week. We don't have a published adventure, so it's like, just throwing together stuff. I just listen to the players and just, that sounds cool. Okay, that's going to happen now.
One that I think is often ignored is we assume these characters get together and just start going. But what kind of an experience we have will really vary depending on how that team gels as characters and players. Even if players are best friends, how those characters are going to gel when they're new at the beginning of a campaign. And so something that's really important is too few adventures have an opportunity for the characters to get to know each other and build a good, positive rapport where it's teamwork oriented. It's doing something, but it's low key. It's not a battle. It's that ability to get to speak to one another and work together. I wrote an adventure where at the beginning you're going to a town and you each have a mission. Well, the missions cross a bit, right? And so it gets those characters talking about what are their missions, how can they help each other. It changes everything when the team gels like that. And I think too few adventures have that in them.
That's good. That's a good point. Yeah. I want to take a look at one more thing here. This is so looking back at this Tales of Argosa, they do a similar thing where they have, the map location with the room descriptions. And then they have a lot of color coding, which I think is a nice benefit if you have that. And then they have also, what's the light, what's the sound, what are the ground. Interesting idea, smell of rotting flesh. So that's pretty cool. But again, I would do it for myself, just as a set of sentences of things I might describe.
Yeah, and these are pretty good. The combination of the icons and the and they're good terms. Like you can use that to run with fairly well. And that's my whole piece about that kind of OSR style is, can I just run with this, or do I need to figure it out, right? Do I need to decode it and how it all, these little things say something, but I can't actually just improvise with it. I must some of them must lead to what's happening, right? And that's where it gets tough, because you can't just ad lib. You must be beholden to the rest of the text, and that requires you to understand all of it. And in that sense, box text is better, because box text is someone having written that whole thing for you, and so it just really varies.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And just really on purpose. Everything's kind of curated, right? You don't necessarily have to read every line of it, but every line the players can see. That's why I like bullet text a lot, is sometimes players don't see some of the room, right? And so you're reading it and they're like, oh, where's that even at? I don't know where that's at.
Yeah.
So versus when it's all run together in a paragraph format, you can't break that stuff out as easily.
Yeah. And as a designer, if you know that there's going to be a map right next to the text, you can avoid saying this 50-foot diameter room.
Yeah.
But you sometimes will never know, one, if there'll be a map, two, where that map will be in relation to the text. So you end up generally having to write it anyway.
Yeah, when you're writing it for an adventure, when I take it and curate it for the Roll20 table I'm running, I cut out where the doors are, I cut out where the room is, because you can see it. It's right there on the map. I'll describe how high the ceilings are sometimes and stuff like that.
It's interesting with RPGs. Sometimes they have a very different style of how they approach adventures, which fits the game really well, and sometimes they don't, right? Like Draw Steel knows it's going to always have a battle map, and it's feeding off of that with its descriptions, which is good, because that's an expectation. But it's interesting to say contrast with Daggerheart. Daggerheart's fear and hope concept would and the idea of emergent play that they espouse in the role-playing game aren't reflected in the initial adventure that's out. Like, it's a very normal adventure. And I think that's a miss. It's a fine adventure. It's a fine time. You know, I've had a great time playing it in a couple of times, but it doesn't really deploy what the book says you can do with the game. And that's where you want to approach it differently. And a good game that does that is Eclipse Phase. If you ever look at their adventures for the sci-fi game, like, their adventures are mind-bending, which reflects this concept of you being in some body and switching out of bodies and all these kinds of very bizarre far future things. Those adventures reflect those kinds of concepts very well, and so I think it behooves manufacturers, role-playing game companies, to think through, if we're saying our experience is based on this. I think Fate does that well, right? Where it says, you know, here are the keywords for this encounter, and therefore the encounter is fairly open for you to use these aspects, and you've got a clear goal, and the rest is sort of emergent play. That's good. That's your game, so your adventure reflects that. You want your adventure to back up your RPG experience, push it forward.
Yeah. Then I was going to pull up the suggestion I sent to you, Teos. Take one last look at this. You tell me what things are good and what things aren't good. It'll take me just a second here to copy it. So this is the Road to Broadhurst adventure. And the first encounter in that one . There we go. All right. So this is the Draw Steel format, just tweaked a little bit, which I think Draw Steel does a great job. So they got the bullet points for the description, and there's just a few of them. There's usually like 4, right? It's quick, it's to the point, and then I'll zoom in here a little bit more. Then you have some secret notes, and that's just for the DM. And then you're into what are the monsters. And then you're into what do you adjust the monsters depending on the number of heroes in the party. And then which map are you using? And then you can have tactics. And then this is an important one. I maybe should have highlighted it, but it's very important in Draw Steel to know how an encounter is supposed to end, because usually they don't have to kill everything. That's a big feature in the rulebook, right? Is that there's a lot of different ways to end an encounter. And if everyone just goes till everything's dead, it feels very samey, and doesn't really give any incentive to the players to do anything different in combat. look for other ways out. And then the one thing I'm always finding I can't find when I look back at Draw Still Adventures, how many victories
Yeah.
was that? So that's where I'm saying, bold that, please.
Yeah, it could be in another color for
Yeah,
all I'm
or another
concerned. I'm
color,
always
'cause-
trying to find that in Delian
Yeah.
Tomb. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I get to the end of the adventure, like, or just, a couple pages on. Was that one victory? Was that two victories? And then trying to find that.
Yeah, and maybe we'll have to look at Crack the Sun, what we do for different like handouts and things like that. And so probably something that'd be great is just showing a victory map, of
Yeah.
each account, because we have that on the production side because we need to track that. You got to track your 16 victories, make sure you're leveling, and then have some options. And so it wouldn't be hard to pull that together. So that's a neat idea to do something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, that's such a nice breakdown, right? That's really clear to figure that out.
How do you set the parameters for adventure design in each system? Do you build a framework first or start with an idea and adapt it to the rules?
You have to start with the rules. You have to start with the game that you're working in. That doesn't mean you can't have ideas and bring ideas to it. But as we've already talked about, a Draw Steel adventure is going to be different than a Daggerheart adventure. It's going to be different than a Fate adventure. It's going to be different than a D&D 5th edition adventure. It's going to be different than a D&D 4th edition adventure.
Yeah.
So you need to know what the game is going to pull out of the DM and the GM and the players. And then you're going to want to highlight those. But for an adventure, you sort of always want to have a certain set of things. You always want to describe the situation, give examples of what the players might learn upon investigation, so the game master can make sure everybody's on the same page. Then have beneath that, how is the encounter likely to play out? What does the game master need to know about the monsters, about traps, obstacles, that sort of thing? How does it resolve? Right? Those things are always going to be there, regardless of the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first thing I'll do with the organized play adventure, one of the first things would be to look at the end. Mm-hmm. What is the if everything goes well, what would the end look like?
Yeah,
and make sure I know where does all those things that they could happen to them if it goes well, where do they appear in the adventure? So I don't miss. Oh, they should have found these gecko gloves on this person if they searched them, and I completely missed it. So now I got to throw it in at the end. Oh, you found these over here. So I always do that, and then the connective tissue, right? How do you get from node to node, or room to room, or scene to scene? If it's a one shot with a map, that's your connective tissue. You're done. But if it's more Draw Steel, or if it's Delian Tomb, or Fall of Black Bottom, there can be a whole lot more connective tissue there that you need to kind of outline as DM.
Yeah, and I think you can start with a story, right? You can think through something like the way we would say, here's the plot of this movie. But you very quickly beyond that need to adapt it to the rules, because you have to fit the expected gameplay structure, whether it's Shadow Dark or Draw Steel or anything in between. You need to quickly start breaking it into beats, and pacing matters so much, right? Themes matter so much. And so you want to nail the high level, but then any real design work has to come off of already breaking that down for the game itself. A Shadow Dark adventure is just, going to be so different than a Draw Steel adventure. And you need to think about that at the level of the outline, for example.
Yeah. David, any final thoughts?
I'm really happy to see more and more adventures coming out with novelty and formatting that is stuff that we can steal and use and adapt. And I'm always looking for more adventures like the one you're showing on the screen here that try and do, or at least synthesize, a lot of ideas and bring it together to make them better.
Yeah. Any last thoughts, Teos?
Well, with Crack the Sun, one of the nice things is there's a lot of play testing, right? So MCDM has their own play test squad that goes through everything, and that's starting right now for Act 1. So there is a lot that goes in there, but also it'll be on the MCDM Patreon, and so folks there get to provide feedback, and all that gets taken into account. And so that really helps. That helps a lot to have a lot of eyes on the product and catch those things like this wasn't clear, right? That's one of the most important things. Or
Yeah.
this would have been a lot of fun except for this part that frustrated us, right? Those things are really important.
Shawn, final thoughts?
If you want to be a really excellent game designer, play and run games with strangers.
Yeah.
Because if you run a game for your home group, you are going to be really, really good at running a game for 5 to 7 or 4 to 7 very specific people. You take your adventure, you go to a game store and you play with 6 strangers, you're going to learn a hell of a lot about game design. Take that same adventure, run it for 6 more, you're going to learn even more. And you know, you become, even through playing, you become better at putting the pieces together when you need to present this structure that we can argue about, but that we all come to love about role-playing games.
Great final word, Shawn. Thank you, Shawn. Thank you, Teos. Thank you, David. And thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll see you all later.